Pirate Kings, Pirate Queens, and non-binary monarchs of the sea, thank you once again for coming to the channel. Pirate Kings, Pirate Queens, and non-binary monarchs of the sea, thank you once again for coming to the channel. It's great to see you. Today, I am finally getting the chance to start a video series that I've wanted to do ever since this game got announced. The minute that I saw the first posting about it. And I finally have some time for it, so we're going to start doing some deck profiles. It's the first of hopefully many for all the leaders that international players are about to get access to when One Piece Set 1 Romance Dawn comes out in just under 2 weeks. Can you believe it? Can you believe this game is finally on the horizon? Like, we're going to get to hold like actual booster packs and shred them and pull things. I'm so ready. I'm so ready. I'm so ready. Calm down. Calm down. All right. So we're going to start things off with what I believe is one of the front runners of this format, Mono Purple Kaido. While I still haven't really been able to put as much time into playing as I'd like to, since I've been spending most of my free time making spreadsheets about the game and also, moving all that stuff, I have managed to get a fair deal of testing in with this. I've got some practice. At the time of recording, I think I'm 39, 40 games with Kaido so far. But basically my goal is to make a new profile for a different deck every time I hit 30 games. And I feel, generally comfortable with the deck I've been playing. The extra Kaido practice just came from the fact that I was lucky enough to have some local real-life tournaments, and I decided to bring him to it, and we had a great time. Now, in this video, I'm going to be giving a card-by-card breakdown of the list that I've settled on for the moment, as well as some other potentially spicy substitutions that have seen play in Japan in lists that have won tournaments over there. Now, make sure you stay on the lookout for another upload this week, where I'm going to be showing off some games with this list with real-time commentary as I'm playing. Now, if you enjoy this video or you find it helpful, do me a favor, take a second, give a thumbs up to that like button, and blast breath the subscribe button for me. It really, really helps this channel. If you have any thoughts on what you see and hear in this video, just leave a comment down below. It's always great to get feedback and discourse from the community, because when we help each other learn, we all get better. And we're going to start things off by talking about our leader, Kaido, from the Purple Starter deck. His Vex is pretty simple, and it's also pretty insane. It's ridiculous. By returning 7 Don in play back to the Don deck, you get to trash the top card of your opponent's life. Now, these Don can be active, they can be rested, they can be attached to someone, so you still get use out of them before you sacrifice them to burn your opponent. And this isn't the kind of ability that you're going to be using every single turn, like Luffy's, like Zoro's, like Odin's, or Dofi's. You might get to use it twice sometimes, but in most cases, you're going to use it once when you are committing to going for the kill. Now, usually this is going to present itself when your opponent's back down to 2 life and you've got another high power character on the field, at which point you can attach those 7 Don to Kaido, attack with him for 12k, use his effect, and then attach any remaining Don to your other character, and then swing for the game. Now, I want to make sure that I say, use this play only when you are confident that your opponent's not going to be able to counter out of the final attack. Because otherwise you're going to be stuck at 5 Don maximum next turn, or 6, but one will be rested, which could leave you pretty vulnerable if you've had to use a lot of your defensive options in that game already. Now, luckily, this deck is all about ramp, which can help mitigate and recover from certain tight spots. If you have the right start, you can essentially get 3 Don every turn, and we have some events that can get you even more as the game goes on. From there, this list is going to run a bunch of cards that sacrifice Don to KO your opponent's characters, potentially even wiping the entire board, and some beefy power values at the higher end of our curve. Unfortunately, Kaido can sometimes just lose to himself, like he's just falling off a Sky Island, and even if you do manage to get Onigashima in your opening hand, it could be a while before you get to play another decent attacker, which isn't always a death sentence, but it could get you in trouble if you don't have the defensive options to carry yourself through to a bigger board. And moving into the main deck, let's go over the blockers that we're running. Even though Purple's main characteristic is ramp, accelerating Don, controlling the board, Kaido runs a very heavy defensive package compared to a lot of other decks in the format, including 12 blockers. Higurashi and Black Maria are pretty self-explanatory chump blockers, though in some very, very rare scenarios I found myself actually using Higurashi to attack into a 1k Searcher, just because I really didn't want my opponent to pop off and get ahead of me in that one. Queen is a card that you're going to want to get out as soon as possible in most cases, since he gets you card advantage, which is huge for your defense, as we're going to talk about in the next slide. It also gets you to some of your key cards that you want to see in the later game there. Now, for anyone who's been keeping up on the Japanese releases, you'll notice that I'm not running any of the 4-cost Uta from the film starter deck, and that is solely because we don't get her till February. That is when the film starter deck is slated to come out. We're going to see what happens with product delays and Bandai being Bandai. We'll see. Either way, we're not going to have her yet, and I want this profile to reflect everything that we have access to right when Romance Dawn comes out. And speaking of defensive options, we also have a lot of counter power here, with 12 2k counters on top of that. Most of the time, you're going to be using them for just that, stopping small attacks on life in the early game, boosting your event cards when you either don't want to or aren't able to block, but they do have some use outside of that now and then, particularly Sasaki. With one don't attached, he is essentially a mini Onigashima when he attacks, so if you don't manage to find it in your opening hand, he can be a decent substitute. And then with the combined card pool from the Star decks and Romance Dawn, we have a 4th 2k counter option, Kurozumi Orochi. But I chose to just run the ulti and the Drake instead because they can both function as a second attacker that at least has a decent chance to stick around for more than one turn. Well, maybe not a decent chance. They at least have a chance to stick around for more than one turn. Because sometimes you have those games where you need to get more swings in with a bit more base power. And we don't run any page 1 here. Ulti's effect is never going to come into play, but she does have the same power as Drake at base for 1 Don less. That being said, Drake's hand rip can come in really handy in certain places, but for the most part, they're both still mainly going to be used in hand for their 2000 counter in most circumstances. Now, bridging the gap between these and our higher cost characters are a few cards that can give us some utility and some pressure in the early game. Who's Who and Jack. Now, Who's Who's removal effect can clear a lot of stuff. Small blockers and searchers, obviously, but it also hits some of those lower cost aggressive pieces. Think like Set 1 Robin and Rush Zoro. It can hit Sentomaru, it can hit either Nami, it can hit Okiku. And this is especially good if you manage to trigger him off the life. And, if you manage to ramp and you can afford to put 2 Don't on him, you get an extra 5k swing in, and you can address that problem I mentioned with the early game where you just don't have enough bodies to swing with and keep up. On the other hand, Who's Who has no counter. It's really, really bad in the games when you end up with a bunch of them in your hand and your opponent starts getting to the top of the curve. He is one of those cards that I have been the most back and forth on. I started my testing with a full playset, then I took them all out. Then I was putting him back in because I want more removal, and I saw it was popular in Japan, and now I've got him at 2. Overall, that feels pretty good because he's still really, really useful, but I'm not feeling like I see him too much. Just enough where I get that deletion there, and I have another body on the board in the early game. Jack is here to try and patch up that other weakness I mentioned at the start of the video, missing Onigashima. That sucks. It really sucks. It especially sucks in the early game because that 1 extra Don can be what lets you play a king to KO something, or get 2 attacks in instead of 1, or even just lets you attack for 6 with your leader instead of 5, so your opponent has to at least commit a 2k counter in order to get out of it, or waste one of their blockers. Being a math nerd, I did some hypergeometric distribution math, and I found that the chances of seeing exactly 1 ramp card in your opening hand maxes out when you run 10 targets. So if we count our 4 Onigashima, and then the 4 Sasaki that, we're pretty okay with seeing in the 48% of games where we don't get the Oni in our opening hand or a mulligan, that leaves 2 more slots that we have to fill if we want to make things optimal for some early ramp. Now, the Set 1 ulti is a decently popular option to this end, but I decided to go with the Jack from the starter deck because he's got an extra 1,000 power for what's essentially the same cost, and he's able to counter. Trashing a card from your hand might seem like a steep cost, but I think those other benefits really outweigh it if it means we're getting up to 6 or 7 active Don on turn 3. Then, if you draw him later, he actually has some use, and he can make situations where you only need 1k counter and don't want to waste one of your 2ks a lot easier. He saves you from a lot of awkwardness in this deck. And next, we can talk about our higher cost characters. Pretty much every Kaido list is going to run some combination of each King and each Kaido, and I personally feel safe going with no less than 2 of each of these cards, and with no more than 11 in total of all of these. Now, if that sounds like a high top end, this is what we're ramping for. This is what it all adds up to. We're mostly only using the leader effect at the end of the game, sometimes not all if we're getting really aggressive, and I've had a couple instances where I managed to use both Kaido and one of the Kings in the same game. And then those extra copies, they can just be easy discard fodder for Queen and Jack. The Kings are pretty straightforward, letting you KO a 4 cost or lower for -1 Don, or a 3 cost or lower and a 2 cost or lower for -2 Don on the 7 cost King. The 6 cost takes care of all the same things that Who's Who does. He has a little more offensive power, and he also lets you remove the 4 cost Warlords and the passive Feasta that you're going to see in a lot of blue decks, mainly Dofi. Uta as well, he can take care of her once she comes out. And then that 7 cost is going to help out against the Law matchup, the Mirror, or really any other matchup where your opponent's going to have a lot of low cost characters out that you're going to need to clear. Again, I think these are both very, very necessary pieces in the deck, but I went for one more of the 6 cost since he's cheaper and he's just more universally useful. 9 cost Kaido can clear 5 costs, of which there are a lot you want to get rid of. First one that comes to mind is the Rush Luffy from the Red Star deck, but there's some more. There is Law, there's Drake, there's Virgo, there's Yamato, there's Hawkins. They're all going to see some play. There's Queen in the Mirror as well. And then if your opponent just has a small blocker in play, you can just, clear that, get a surprise 10k swing in, and then potentially use your leader effect the next turn to close things out. If you're doing well enough and your opponent is wasting their defenses. Now, just after the big boss, we have the even bigger boss, the 10 cost Kaido. 12k is the highest base power that we have in the game. That is the max that kid is going to be swinging at when he attacks twice in a turn. And we can potentially make him even stronger than that, though we don't often want or need to. There's not really a ton to say here, by getting rid of 6 Don on your turn and then getting back up to 6 the turn after that. He's basically One Piece's version of Dark Hole from those Wild West Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon days, if anyone played Yu-Gi-Oh! When they were 6 years old on the playground. There's actually one more thing I want to say about the 10 cost Kaido, and that is timing. Just because you're 10 Don and you have him in hand, that does not mean it's time to play him. You really want to wait until your opponent has a wide or strong board, preferably both. Committing all your Don to playing him and starting the next turn at 6, that's a big investment, and you want to make sure that you make the most out of it. Sometimes your opponent might be so on edge about him potentially coming out and ruining their board that when they say you making a bunch of smaller attacks instead of playing him when you're already at 10 Don, they just play their 8 cost Kid or their 9 cost Mihawk, they might think you don't have him, and then they might overextend, making the board wipe even more devastating when you manage to do it. Now, at the same time, you want to make sure that you don't overextend yourself before you play him. I think I had a game or two where I was so focused on my defenses that I used counters in my hand since they put me just above my opponent's attacks, instead of using some blockers that I played down the previous turn. Just thinking, okay, counter gets me exactly what I need. A blocker can take care of anything. But when the next turn came around, I was at a point where I had to play the 10 cost, or they would have just had too much pressure for me to get over them, regardless of the blockers I already had in play. So sometimes you just play yourself. It happened to me. Don't let it happen to you. And I feel like, Kaido has this reputation of being like, ooh, unga bunga, blow things up deck, and it can be that sometimes. But the 10 cost Kaido is one of the biggest examples of the difference that a good pilot can make in this deck. disclaimer, I'm not saying I'm that pilot. No. Talk to like a bunch of other people. But I have managed to get a glimpse of the ceiling's height from all the way down here in the basement. And then rounding out the list are our events and our stages. Blast Breath and Thunder Bagua are the standard 4K counter events for 1 cost and for 2 cost respectively. Blast Breath is an easy 4 of, really not too much to say there. And then Thunder Bagua has a nice bonus effect of giving you a rested Doan if you're already at 2 life or less. And this brings us to another layer of the deck, timing and defense. As Vampok mentioned when I interviewed him, if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend it. The link's in the description. I actually went back and listened to it myself when I started testing this, and realized that he's just got a lot of really good stuff to say there. So, Vampok, if you watch this one, thank you again. Really appreciate you getting me on track to be not completely terrible with this deck. And when you're playing Kaido, you want to defend just enough to make your opponent put a decent amount of work in to get you down to 2 life. At which point your Thunder Baguas are active. They can get you the extra Doan. You can work them into the mix to get around the bigger attacks they have in the late game. But, you're not super afraid of getting down to 2 life in the early game. You just really want to make them work for it, at which point you can go all in with the defenses and you get more out of it. I like this card a lot, and while I don't think there's really much of a precedence to play it at 4, at least from what I've seen in Japan, maybe because of the cost it has compared to some other defensive options at our disposal, I don't think a 3rd would be completely out of the question. And then our last event slot is going to go to Brachio Bomber, a card that I was absolutely sleeping on until about a week ago, when I was looking at some Japanese decks, realized just how popular it is, especially before the Uta came out, and I decided to give it a try. I was really skeptical even when I first added it, and even when I started playing games with it, but after it started coming up, I became a really huge fan of it ever since then. It's not a character like King for the same cost is, so, it's not going to give you extra attacks or body on the board, but it makes your range of KO options even wider, especially if your opponent has something really aggressive out in the early turns, and the trigger ability can give you the chance for some extra ramp, whether you play it for your hand or off a trigger, which it shares with Thunder Bagua. Or I should just say its ability to ramp in general, regardless of whether it's offhand or as a trigger. Once Uta comes out, there is a chance I might cut this for her, but at the moment, I'm really enjoying what it does for the deck. And then finally, we have the heart and soul of this deck, Onigashima. This is easily the single best card released in the starter decks, and I'd say it's in the top tier of the card pool with Romance Dawn coming out. There is no reason, I repeat, there is no reason not to run 4 of this card, as I really hope that I've managed to establish throughout the course of this video. Basically, ramp good, consistency good, Wororo, Woro, Woro, as a great philosopher once said. Before I show you the full list I'll put together, I just want to touch on a couple cards that saw play in lists that managed to win tournaments in Japan, but that didn't make it into this list I'm showing off today. Uta, of course, is going to be crazy good when she comes out, since she's a 5k blocker, costs you 4, and she lets you lets you rest something when she blocks, but she's just sadly not out yet, so we've had to make do. I did mention ulti and why I'm not playing her over Jack, but she still saw quite a bit of popularity and success overseas. The Jack from set 1 mostly saw play before Uta came out. He could be another answer to the lack of early attacks if you're willing to forgo the extra ramp or removal that we've added. Douglas Bullet also comes out in the film starter in February. He's got a great effect, but, after I talked with Vampok and I watched some games and just really grew to appreciate the higher end of our curve in this deck. To me, he doesn't really seem worth taking away from the package you already have of those removal pieces. Set Queen 1, however, is cute. I was tempted to play him a couple times. I haven't gotten around to testing him. I think it's fun. He gives you another rush opportunity if you want to take your opponent by surprise. And, I think he could be worthwhile in a more aggressive list. And Ultimortar is another card that's been spoken very highly of to me, that I liked when I ran it for a few games. It was the other contender for those last two slots that ended up going to Jack. If I had a 61st and a 62nd card, they would be Ultimortar, but I chose Jack over this because, 2K counter and a card in hand, that's a fair trade for paying essentially 2 Doan after you, do your resting and your sending away. But I'm already feeling pretty good about the amount of counter this deck has at the moment, and I think that ramp is the thing I want to focus on more with those 2 slots. Set 1 page 1 gives ultis some more versatility, a way to actually use their effect, and he gives you a chance to clear some threats early. Babanuki and Fukurokuju have a more efficient power to cost ratio. If you play them before your opponent gets out their 8 cost kid in that matchup, they have a good chance of getting over it pretty easily. Black Maria is a fair option if you want to run a full 16 blockers, especially as a substitute for Uta, since she has the same cost and pretty decent ability. Not as good as Uta's ability to rest something, but if your opponent doesn't think you're gonna rest the Doan or they're expecting a Blast Breath, it can throw them off the rhythm a little bit. Then we've got Kurozumi Orochi. Orochi is a piece of cardboard, and if I'm understanding the implementation of Private Knowledge correctly, he can give you a chance to map out your life cards at the start of the game, and that was really enticing for me as someone who came from Pokemon, where you have to keep track of your prize cards. But that also might not want to be the way I want to build this deck, for the reasons I mentioned when we were talking about 2K counters near the start here. Also, real quick, K-codes from just after recording this video here. One more card that I want to talk about that's not on the slide here. I figured I'd throw it in as something for the people who would decide to actually watch the whole video and listen along. Sheepshorn. Sheepshorn from the first set. Anthony and Max from Movement have hyped this card up so much, and I see where they're coming from with it. It can just rest something little and pesky, a searcher, a teeny blocker. You can get it out of the way, and then you basically, you're gonna get those dome back. I like, if you run it, I respect it. I've never seen it in a list that's won a Japanese tournament. They just might not be on the spice, though. Max and Anthony just might be better than every single player in Japan. I think that's what's going on here. Or at the very least, they're more creative. I love you guys. But yeah, I do think it's a good card. And if you want to try that, I respect you. And it's probably going to end up in my list at some point as I keep on testing. Now, whether you listen to all my explanations or you just skip to the end to take a screenshot, here's the full list laid out. Again, I'll be putting a playset of Uta in as soon as February rolls around. And at this point, I think that Who's Who and Brachio Bomber are going to be the cuts I make for that. But, we'll see what ends up happening as time goes on and as the format develops. I know I'm going to be playing this deck a lot at in-person tournaments. It's probably going to be my main deck. Mainly, well, one, because it's good, it has a great mattress for it, but two, because it's cheap. This is probably one of the cheapest functioning decks that you're going to be able to get for this game. Because a lot of the really good cards in here, they're from starter decks. A lot of the set 1 cards are low rarity, and then as far as supers go, you really just need the 10 cost Kaido and the 7 cost King. And from the research I did on Japanese prices near the end of set 1 format, it's hard to put like a dollar value on them because the value of a yen and just consumer demand is going to change over time. But speaking from a relative standpoint compared to the other super rares, those two, the King and the Kaido, they're pretty cheap compared to a lot of other things. So I think this is a very manageable deck budget-wise, which is great for me, being a broke LA actor who really needs to be conscious of how he spends his money, but still wants to play One Piece. So I'm going to be getting a lot of reps in with this deck. Now, please stay tuned for the gameplay video later this week. And if you didn't get the chance to like this video or subscribe to the channel or leave a comment, not that you'd leave a comment in the middle of the video at the start of this, but you did happen to enjoy what I had to say here, I'd be really grateful if you just took a second to do so, to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff that you hear in every video. I'm K-Codes, this is Sakura Kingdom. I'm so excited to be doing these deck profiles. Stay tuned for more, and I hope you have a great day.